Welcome to the next episode, everyone. I hope you're doing well. We're getting back into schools and colleges soon, so I'm sure there's going to be a wide range of feelings about that. Personally, I think it is a needed step to get back into schools, colleges. I know some people have kind of got into a good rhythm with online learning, but I think for a great majority of people, the online learning was not, let's say, that experience wasn't really working well for the bigger majority, for the majority of people. So, bearing that in mind, onwards, ladies and gents. So let's proceed. We're going to be continuing our discussion of exchange. I know it feels like it's taking ages to get through this topic, isn't it? But that's what we are going to expect, because as the series is called, a bit of biology I've settled on, I guess. So it's going to be small steps. But I hope, for the future, if anyone's hopping on board at any point, I hope these kind of smaller, consecutive small chunks of going through the topic is going to be helpful for anyone who's kind of jumping on at any point. Can just go through. So we're continuing our discussion of exchange, and we've discussed why. We've discussed the general principles of, the features. We've discussed the features of the exchange systems, and then we've been looking at the examples. We've discussed gas exchange in insects. We've discussed gas exchange in fish, and now we'll talk about mammals. I can spell it. Okay, so off we go. So our discussion about mammals, again, I would like to keep it simple. I don't want to go into too much depth. I want you guys to hold on to the key concepts. Let's get the essential concept in your head. Let's get that machine working, and then we can accessorize the thing as much as we like with the additional details. But I think we got to get that car moving, and then we can kind of give it a good paint job, and we can put the fluffy dice in. We can do all those things, but the car's got to work. It's got to take us from A to B, and that's the whole point of this series. So let's go. Right, so yeah, we are talking lungs. We're talking lungs, and if we're gonna carry on how we've been going so far, we're gonna talk about how the lungs achieve a high rate of diffusion. That's the whole point. How do the lungs achieve a high rate of diffusion? We've talked about the three key features, and now it all just remains to discuss how they achieve that, right? So what do we need to hit? We need to hit a few features. We need to hit a high surface area to volume ratio. Okay, we need to, or the lungs need to achieve a high concentration gradient or difference. And finally, we need to keep those diffusion distances short. So short diffusion distances, right? So how do the lungs do that then? So yeah, let's talk about the lungs. Generally speaking, maybe what I'll do is I'll just do a short video here just summarizing how the lungs achieve that, and then maybe in subsequent parts I'll go into a little bit more detail, or should I just do the whole thing? Let's see how quickly I can do this. But that's not the point, is it? The point is we wanted to keep it kind of bite-sized and digestible. Let's see how we go. Let's see how we go. I'm going to stop as soon as I think we've covered a chunk. So I think, yeah, when talking about the lungs, I think we can't just jump straight in. I think we can't go straight into, how do they do the surface area to volume ratio? How do they do the concentration gradient? Yeah, I think it's a little bit more involved than that. So we need to understand, the structural details. So we, the airways, the main airway, the trachea, then it kind of branches out into the bronchi. The bronchi branch into the bronchioles, and at the end of the bronchioles, at the end of those, we have the alveoli, right? So, and it's at the alveoli where we have that high surface area. We have loads of capillaries that kind of go past, make close contact with the alveoli. And remember, these capillaries, they are branching off. So they're kind of branching off, and they're going to each of the alveoli in turn, but they are branching off from the pulmonary artery, aren't they? Right? So the pulmonary artery, and I know we haven't kind of met that in our discussion so far, so I won't go into too much detail, but essentially the pulmonary artery is bringing deoxygenated blood, right? So it's coming in, deoxygenated, that blood, okay, and as it goes past the alveoli or alveolus, it's, the oxygen is diffusing into the blood, the carbon dioxide is diffusing out of the blood into the alveolus, and off that blood then goes oxygenated off, and those capillaries reform and converge. So let's get back to black. So those capillaries, they reform, so capillaries rejoin, converge again, and then they form the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein. Okay, so this is from heart, and the pulmonary vein is going to take the blood, which is oxygenated now, back to the heart. Okay, so that is the overall picture. Okay, and yes, there's some structural detail to do with the airways. I'm not going to focus too much on that. I'd like to focus on how this thing works. Again, key principles. Okay, just going to reduce the pen thickness there. All right, so that's the basic system, and I think let's just discuss a little bit about what is happening at the alveolus. So this deoxygenated blood is flowing past the alveolus. Deoxygenated blood is flowing past the alveolus. There it goes, right there. Okay, and as it flows past, now remember, this blood here at this point, there is a low oxygen concentration in the blood. Okay, and there is a high CO2 concentration. Now, the air in the alveolus, now I'll draw that in black. The air in the alveolus, remember, has arrived from essentially the atmosphere, right? So it's been inhaled. Yeah, inhaled through the trachea, through the bronchioles, and into the alveolus. And in the alveolus, the essentially the atmospheric, or the air from the atmosphere, has a high oxygen concentration, and it's relative to the blood, it's got a lower CO2 concentration. So we have established a concentration gradient. So we're going to zoom back in. If you're listening to this, and just mentally zoom in close now to the capillary and the alveolus. And what we should see then is oxygen, because it's higher in the alveolus than the capillary, oxygen is going to diffuse into the capillary from the alveolus, and the CO2, so O2 from alveolus into capillary, diffusion. The CO2 is higher in the capillary. Remember, it's deoxygenated blood. All that blood from the respiring tissues is now making its way to the lungs from the heart. So high in CO2, product of respiration, and because of that, it will be diffusing into the alveolus from the capillary, and that is the main story. Okay, and what we want to discuss really is what are those adaptations that helps this process. Remember, ultimately this is all happening by diffusion. Okay, right, when we zoomed in to the capillary and the alveolus, oxygen was moving from the alveolus into the capillary by diffusion. CO2, carbon dioxide, was diffusing from the capillary into the alveolus by diffusion. And this has always been about ensuring a high enough rate of diffusion. So that's how it works. But what are the adaptations to make sure that that rate of diffusion is as high as possible? Because remember, these organisms are large, right? They are multicellular, and they have a high metabolic requirement, right? So because of those things, there's going to be a high rate of respiration collectively overall, and therefore overall we need to supply lots of oxygen and get rid of CO2 as quickly as possible. So let's think about those adaptations now. So high surface area, well, first of all, in terms of the high surface area, we have many alveoli. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is that there is a very it's that network of capillaries, right? The network of capillaries collectively, if you add up the surface area, because the capillaries are small, right? But there's loads of them, and if you add up their surface area, they have a high surface area. So you've got two surfaces which have a high surface area exchanging. Okay, so because it wouldn't have helped if we have a high surface area provided by the alveolus, but not enough capillaries to exchange with, that wouldn't really have been productive, and vice versa. So they both need to have a high surface area over which to carry out the exchange. Okay, so it's because we have many alveoli, and I do need to emphasize the many. All right, it's not just having alveoli, it's having lots of alveoli that provides the high surface area, and that network, not just having capillaries, but having that network of capillaries that collectively adds up to a high surface area. Okay, next we'll go short diffusion distance, because the discussion about the concentration gradient is going to be a bit more involved. So the short diffusion distance, well, if we look at our alveolus, so imagining we have our alveolus there. Now the alveolus is made of epithelia that are squamous epithelia, which means that they are flat cells. Okay, so because they're flat cells, they have a thin wall. So that wall of the alveolus is quite thin. The distance that oxygen might need to diffuse to get through the wall is thin, because those cells are flat, have a flat shape. Okay, so there is that. And because the alveoli are one cell thick, again, that reduces the distance of diffusion as well. And similarly, the capillary, again, the capillary is one cell thick, or it has a wall. The endothelial wall is one cell thick. Also, the alveolus and the capillary are very, very close to each other. So again, those things collectively minimize. So if I draw a capillary next to the alveolus, okay, they're very, very close to each other. So the total distance that you need to diffuse through is quite small, or relatively small. Okay, next we have, so that's the diffusion distance, right? So we've maintained a short diffusion distance. So finally, we'll talk about that concentration gradient. I'll zoom out, it's getting a bit messy. Okay, now concentration gradient then, the concentration gradient is all about the ventilation. Now, I could talk about all the steps involved in ventilation, but I'm not going to. Again, I feel that's accessory. I think I'd rather talk about the purpose of ventilation and how it relates to the whole idea of the exchange, or the rate of diffusion. That's what it's all about for me. Okay, so the ventilation is essentially what we call breathing, or the ventilation is achieved by breathing. Okay, and because of that breathing, we ensure a high concentration gradient. This is the concept that we have to be confident with. Okay, remember, the why and the because are going to save your biological life. Okay, the why and the because. Keep asking yourself why and keep trying to get to the because. If you connect everything up with your because, biology is going to make a lot more sense. Okay, so ventilation, what's it doing? Well, ventilation essentially is the process of expanding the thorax and causing the lungs to basically be pulled outwards. And when you do that, okay, so let's just imagine two states, right? So let's call that an exhale, and we'll call this the lungs kind of a bit more expanded. Okay, all right, so here the lung volume has reduced. So this is what we call exhale, right? And in this one, this is going to be an inhale, because the lung volume is higher, so the thorax volume is higher, and that's kind of essentially pulled the lungs outwards and increased or stretched them out, and so it's sucked in the air essentially. So in an inhale, the lung volume increases. Okay, but what does this all achieve? So in an exhale, you're reducing the thorax volume. So essentially, because you're reducing the volume, because you're reducing the thorax volume, you're increasing pressure. It's like squashing a balloon, right? And then when you squash that balloon, if there's a hole somewhere, or if the mouth of the balloon is open, then you're going to force out the air, right? So you're going to increase the pressure, and because of that pressure, and the mouth is open, and the nose is free to let the air out, because of that, then the increased pressure causes air to move out. Okay, and that's exhale. Then comes the inhalation, and because of the movement of the diaphragm and the movement of and the work of the intercostal muscles on the ribs or the rib cage, we increase the volume, right? So during an inhale, all those muscular contractions cause cause the thorax volume, to increase. Cause the thorax volume to increase. Now, because the volume is increased, suddenly the pressure has reduced. Pressure is lower. And because the pressure is lower in the lungs than it is in the atmosphere, it causes air to move in down the pressure gradient from the high pressure in the atmosphere to the lower pressure in the lungs. So because the pressure is lower, air moves in. So this is the key thing that I want you to think about. And because of this, what happens is that the air in the lungs are constantly refreshed, right? So when the CO2, when there's CO2 in the lungs, when diffused into the air in the lungs from the capillaries, so we got lots of CO2, during an exhale, that air is forced out. Okay? And then when we inhale, air with a high concentration of oxygen is entering the lungs and therefore into the alveoli. So the purpose of the whole ventilation process is to make sure that the concentration of oxygen and CO2 in the alveoli is maintained, such that there's always a higher concentration of oxygen in the alveoli than in the capillary, and there's always a much lower concentration of CO2 in the alveoli than there is in the capillary, right? And so because of that, we are always getting then CO2 diffusing into the alveolus, and because of that we're always getting oxygen diffusing into the blood in the capillary. All right, guys, and therefore thus we satisfy the idea of the maintenance of the concentration gradient. Okay, and as we'll see as we go through different parts of the course in year 2, for example, we see how when the activity of the organism increases, when more respiration is carried out, there are mechanisms to increase the rate of breathing, so that even when activity increases, the concentration gradient keeps up, or is, the breathing rate is increased to keep that concentration gradient there, to keep the oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusing. All right, guys, so that's a little bit of biology. Try to keep it short and sweet. Try to stick to the key ingredients of this process. I hope you appreciate the reason for skipping out on some of the detail was that so we can focus on the things that are the most important, and then we can decorate it and jazz it up a little bit with all the details afterwards. But life in biology can become a lot simpler and a lot more enjoyable if we can prioritize and focus on that content which is going to give us a bit more bang for our buck, right? So if we invest in those things, I think we can do a lot better, okay, rather than treating everything the same. All right, guys, this has been a little bit of biology, and I think the next episode will be a little bit of year 2, continuing perhaps what we'll be doing. We did mutation, right? So we'll be talking about gene regulation. Yes, there is an end credits scene. For you true believers out there who made it to the end of the video, I've just been feeling a tiny little bit of hate for the music that I've put as the background now. I just wanted your thoughts and opinions on that. I put the music in because I wanted the atmosphere for the video to not be, work. I wanted the experience to be a little bit more casual, a bit more relaxed, so that we can dispense with all the negativity around studying stuff, and try and just increase the pleasantness of the experience just a tad. But if you think the music is hugely detracting from your experience and learning and being able to even hear me properly, then do let me know, guys. And yeah, if you think the music's okay, but maybe a different genre, or maybe switching up the genres a little bit, I'm happy for your suggestions, guys. So, and yeah, and if there's any other feedback, for all of you who actually watched the whole thing or listened to the whole thing, I would really love to get some feedback from you. So leave some comments, guys, and let me know what you think, because what you think matters to me. Thanks, guys.